All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're basically going on a linguistic detective story. Have you ever wondered how easily a single translated word can completely alter the way millions of people understand an ancient text? Well, we're going to look at exactly how zooming out to see a text's surrounding context can absolutely shift its meaning. And we're doing this by diving into a really fascinating case study from the Quran, specifically chapter 53. Now, what's super interesting about the standard English translation of Quran 53, verse 62, is that it reads, "So prostrate to Allah and worship Him." When you hear that, a very specific image probably pops right into your head, right? The standard translation imports a highly specific meaning, namely a physical prostration, placing your forehead on the ground in a fixed direction. It frames the verse as the strict liturgical command. But putting on our detective hats here, we really have to ask ourselves, does this translation actually make sense within its own paragraph? I mean, if we look at the verses immediately preceding this command, does a sudden abrupt shift to a very specific physical prayer posture actually fit the logical flow of the author's writing? Or have we accidentally imported some external framework into the text? Let's look at section 1, examining the surrounding verses, the scene of the investigation. Okay, to solve this mystery, we need to minimize any outside assumptions and just step back to examine the surrounding text. Let's start with verses 56 through 58. The text here tells us three very specific things. First, a warning is being delivered. Second, an imminent, inevitable event is approaching. And third, none besides Allah can remove or uncover it. So, the subject here is crystal clear, right? It's an urgent warning about an inevitable reality. But notice what is entirely missing here. There is absolutely nothing introducing a ritual practice or a physical liturgy. Now let's see how this builds in the very next verses. Verses 59 through 61 describe the audience's reaction to this urgent warning. And what are they doing? Well, the text says they marvel at the message, they laugh, they fail to take it seriously, and they just remain totally distracted and heedless. Again, look at the language being used. This is an ethical and cognitive description of human behavior. It's a critique of their mental state and their mockery. It is definitely not a discussion about physical rituals. Which brings us directly to our main subject, verse 62. This starts with the Arabic conjunction fa. In English, this translates to therefore or so. Now in grammar, this little word is massive. It signals that this final verse is the direct conclusion of the entire preceding argument we just looked at. So this brilliantly illustrates our logical structure. The text is building an argument step by step. Step 1, the warning is true. Step 2, the imminent event approaches. Step 3, you are mocking the message instead of reflecting on it. Step 4, therefore. Therefore what? What is the logical conclusion to that exact sequence? If the answer is perform a ritual prayer position, we have a massive jarring shift in the subject. It's like a teacher saying, hey, the exam is tomorrow, it determines your grade, you're all laughing and not studying, therefore, give me 10 push-ups. It just doesn't follow the literary flow at all. Moving on to section 2, decoding the root words. What do they really mean? To figure out what conclusion actually fits naturally here, we need to decode the Arabic root words used in verse 62. And honestly, the best way to do this without bias is to just use the source document as its own dictionary. The first word is sajah, which is often translated as prostrate. But rather than automatically meaning forehead to the ground, if we look at the root SJD, it fundamentally describes a state of yielding, conformity, and humble submission. It's really about an internal state of surrender to an order, not necessarily a physical geometric posture. We actually know this is true because of how the text uses the word elsewhere. It tells us that celestial bodies, trees, mountains, shadows, and all beings in the heavens and earth perform sujud. Now, clearly, a shadow or a mountain does not have a forehead to physically place on the ground. The common denominator for all these things is that they involuntarily yield and conform to the laws of nature, or Allah's order. They're existing in a state of submission. Then we have the second word in the verse, abodu, typically just translated as worship. But again, zooming out, the root fundamentally concerns devoted service, willing obedience, and committing oneself to an authority. Actually, the text uses this root in other places to describe people serving their own desires or serving false authorities. You can't exactly perform a physical ritual prayer to your own desires, right? It means what you dedicate your life and your obedience to. Finally, we have the phrase to Allah. The really crucial point here is that the Arabic preposition li as in li Allah, doesn't automatically establish a spatial direction. It's not pointing to a spot on a map. Instead, it expresses belonging or an orientation toward a purpose. So translating it as humble yourselves for Allah or yield for Allah is just as accurate and honestly probably more contextually appropriate than saying prostrate to Allah, as if you're aiming at a physical target.
All right, Section 3, letting the text speak the context test.
So we've got our raw materials, we've minimized our outside assumptions, we've looked closely at the root words. Now let's take these contextual definitions and run them through what we call the context tests. A truly useful way to evaluate any proposed translation is simply asking, does this complete the author's line of reasoning? We're going to test our two potential translations against the logical flow we established earlier. Let's compare them side by side. The text basically said, the warning is true, the event is near, and you're mocking it. Therefore, does it make more sense to say, therefore, perform a ritual act of worship? Or does it make more sense to say, therefore, abandon your mockery, submit yourselves to Allah, and devote yourselves to His guidance? When we contrast them like this, it becomes glaringly obvious which one seamlessly finishes that ethical argument, and which one feels like it was just pasted in from an external ritual manual. On top of that, if we reference the text's own usage in other chapters, like chapter 84, verse 21, we see a really fascinating pattern. The source text consistently shows that the immediate trigger, the catalyst for sujud, is hearing the revelation itself. It's a direct reaction to receiving the message, not the act of walking into a designated physical place of ritual. Which brings us to Section 4, the power of context, coherence over importation. So after putting all these clues together, what is the grand reveal of our textual investigation today? Well, it's all about the incredible power of context. When we read verses 56 through 62 as one single unbroken argument without our external biases, we get this beautifully internally coherent progression. Number 1, this discourse is a warning. Number 2, it warns of an approaching reality. Number 3, people mock it instead of taking it seriously. Number 4, therefore, humble yourselves before Allah in response to this revelation. And number 5, devote yourselves to living according to His guidance. It is a perfect logical loop. As our source document perfectly puts it, that conclusion arises from following the progression of the verses themselves, rather than importing an external ritual framework into the passage. Now, just a quick aside, this doesn't necessarily rule out physical postures existing elsewhere in the text, but it proves objectively that this specific passage relies entirely on textual context to shift the verse's meaning away from a sudden, jarring liturgical command and into a profound call for mental and ethical submission. And that brings us to the end of our analysis, but honestly, it leaves us with a massive question to ponder. If minimizing our imported assumptions can completely transform how we understand this one single passage, it really makes you wonder, what other ancient historical texts could unlock entirely new layers of meaning if we just stepped back, removed our imported biases, and truly let the context speak for itself? Keep that in mind the next time you read a translation. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer today.